This is perhaps one of the most difficult readings that we ever face. It was actually scheduled for last week, and there was a confusion in the reading, and I thought I was going to escape it. But then, because last week's sermon was so much on the topic that was read, I didn't really think that we could just do that show over again, and I thought of lots of alternatives, but here we are. It's because, does Satan exist? Is there evil in the world? I mean, what is more challenging to our faith in God? If anything makes people into atheists, it's the vision of how awful this world is. I mean, I'm not saying that every day is terrible. Most of us sort of stroll along without too much going wrong. But it's a pretty grim scene in terms of the kind of things that actually do happen on this planet, and how really unkind people can be to each other, how unfeeling parents can even be toward their own children or children toward their own parents. I don't need to make a list. I'm sure you have your own list. And so a lot of times the conclusion that a thinking person naturally draws is that there's nobody in charge, that it's just a mess, and the only thing to do is to just squeeze by with as little suffering as you can. And many people walk into our beginning meditation classes, for example, and their hope is just to somehow get rid of a little bit of stress, but leave out the God stuff, please. And they sometimes will never come back because we integrate so powerfully the concept of meditation with the idea that there is a spiritual presence and that what we're really trying to do is relate to it. It's become very trendy these days to try to be spiritual without having to have God in the picture, and especially to try to be spiritual without having Satan in the picture. The problem is that we cannot, just by our own preferences, create reality the way we want it to be. We can try. We can try extremely hard. We can even devote lifetimes, if you accept reincarnation, which usually gets thrown out with the whole rest of it anyway, but we're not there. We're talking about life after life. We can work extremely hard to try to make things work entirely on the basis of myself, my own ideas, my own energy. Have faith in yourself. That's what people say. The difficulty with trying to have faith in ourselves is that deep down we recognize how extremely fragile we are. Isn't that so? And how many things can just move into this world and just take our security away from us. Last week or the week before at Sunday service, somewhere along the line, I was talking about a forest fire that swept through Ananda village now many years ago. But it was quite an experience to watch a fire burn down the place where you live. And we had to move a little bit away from where the fire was actually burning, but we were close enough to be able to just go up in a matter of a few hours and see where there had been trees and forests and houses. Now there was nothing. And on one hand, from a human point of view, it was extremely disconcerting to have all your stuff turned into ash. From another point of view, it was rather delightful, is the only obscure, odd word I can use, to just realize how completely temporary absolutely everything is. Jyotish himself once said to me, I walked into his apartment, his house, this was before he was married many years ago, and he lived in one of the original domes that they'd built at Ananda village, which fortunately was burned down in the forest fire, because it leaked like a sieve. And I came in once and we were having this torrential rain, which we used to have more in those days, and he had actually rigged, most of the water in his dome was coming in from the top, and he'd gotten a funnel that was like a yard across. I've never seen such a thing. He got a funnel, he put it up where most of the leaks were coming, he put a big tube on that funnel, and then he ran it all down into the sink. So the rain was bashing on the outside of the building and also just running like a river right through it, and he was quietly sitting there reading a book, just as like this was perfectly normal. I looked at it, I'm pretty adaptable, especially in physical things. I don't care that much. But I said, Jyotish, how could you stand this? And he said, I figure that it's not that difficult it would be difficult to deal with situations that are unpleasant and permanent. He said, but it's not hard to deal with something that's unpleasant and temporary. And then he smiled so sweetly and he said, of course, is there anything in this world that isn't temporary? Not realizing that house was going to go to ashes soon. In fact, the way he told Devi that their house had been burned down, because she was away when the fire actually came through. She's holding their newborn son. The baby was 11 days old. The house has gone to ashes. Jyoti says, honey, you know the problem we were having with leaks? We don't have it anymore. That was how he told her that their house was gone. Now, imagine how comfortable you can be inside yourself if your consciousness is flexible and imaginative enough to be able to deal with what inevitably comes and then always turn it into something that is forward moving. I've meditated for years on what I consider to be the genius of Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, Yogananda's direct disciple who is responsible for everything that we're experiencing here. His genius in leading people and helping people. And I figured it out in very simple words, and this is only a fraction of it, but it's one thing. He has a genius for understanding how to take you where you are and then have you take one step forward. In other words, which way is forward? And how is it possible to keep going? You know, if we reflect on our lives, we realize that what really takes the heart and soul out of us, so to speak, is when we become depressed and discouraged. Isn't that so? In other words, when we have a negative perspective on our situation, then we give in to the state of, why should I even try anyway? What's the point of doing anything? It's just a worthless endeavor. And people have very different levels at which that sets in. Some people are powerful and just roll right over obstacles that would flatten others. Other people are just reduced to complete impotence at the merest breeze of opposition. But as soon as we overcome that sense of discouragement, isn't it so that almost overcoming that is when the solutions come? Now what our commentary on the scripture was speaking of today is this very important factor, which is that many levels of consciousness exist simultaneously on this level of awareness where we are. We live as human beings, we have our egos. Our ego is the infinite self, absolutely convinced that my true identity is this body I'm living in, that I came into existence when this body was born, and that I will go out of existence when this body dies, and then all the other things that become associated with that. I have to take care of this one, I have to protect this one, I feel lonely because this is the only one I am. If this gets wiped out in some catastrophic event, or might get wiped out, I have to be nervous. All these things, this is all what ego is. Ego isn't just egotism, where you're asserting your will over everyone. It's that you can be very egoic and be very apparently humble. In fact, a certain kind of shyness and self-abnegation and lack of self-confidence is just the other side of ego. Ego can either be, I'm the most powerful, or I'm completely helpless. And it's equally diluted if it's just defined as the power coming from me. And so Yogananda makes this statement, Swami reiterates it today, that all these levels of consciousness are available to us, from the most evil and harsh and hurtful to others to the freedom of a Christ and the uplifting power of a saint. And we simply act as windows for those various states of consciousness, attracting through us whatever we have opened ourselves to. Excuse me, I have to clear my throat. This is the secret of true happiness, of true success in life, and the key to overcoming all fear. But we have to also understand it as it really exists. You see, it's very unfortunate, this sort of tendency now to negate the possibility of a satanic force. Satan is a word that became popular through the Christian Bible. In India, they call the word Maya. And Maya is this, it's a goddess. It's this, what's the word I'm trying to say? It's this force, this delusory force, this almost hypnotic force that causes us to believe that certain things are true when they are not true. It causes us to believe that we are small, we are limited, we are vulnerable, that our happiness depends on what happens to this individual body, that this world is enduring, that it's possible to fix realities in this world and make ourselves happy by making those things fixed. This is all the force of Maya. This is the force that causes us to believe that everybody in the universe will die but not me, right? That I alone, or that God is in charge of everything except my little area in which I am solely responsible. However we twist it around, that's the force of Maya. But the concept that there is an actual force that is trying to confuse us and that is trying to persuade us to do things that are against our best interests, it's extremely important for our spiritual well-being that we recognize that. Now, virtually every spiritual epic or great even piece of literature takes place in some kind of a setting in which there is an intense conflict. Isn't that so? The Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the two great epics of India, are actual wars. There's the good side and the bad side, and they go to war with each other, and everybody fights, and the heroes are brave, and people get killed left and right, and this huge thing takes place. And this is not an accident that it happens that way. It's drawing into heroic proportions exactly what we're experiencing on a daily basis. We can protest philosophically that we want it to be different. We can argue that God should have created the world differently than this, that by now our own egoic determination, we're all going to get together and we're going to make reality other than it's always been. I think that's a little presumptuous. It sounds good. It sounds like a nice story. If we all really sort of start thinking about the monarch butterflies, they won't become extinct. Well, it sounds good. But the actual fact of the matter is, it's hard to even keep your mind on the monarch butterflies for very long because it gets drawn off into other things, like whether you're hungry or thirsty or lonely or, even just practically speaking. We find that we are magnets for many different levels of consciousness. And sometimes we care about others and sometimes we don't. So on the spiritual path, unless we recognize that this is a battle and there are two sides for it, you see, the great danger is we'll never put out enough energy. And that's what causes people, above all, to fail spiritually. Rarely do we go out in flames. Rarely do we just blow up and then explode and go off into some other completely impossible point of view. Usually we just gradually run out of energy and just dribble down into dullness. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that what we see around us that really makes people old? And some people are old when they're very young. Is because they've just gradually let their intellectual or physical capacities narrow, and above all, let their realm of concern narrow and their consciousness narrow until finally we're just living in sort of what's for breakfast, and then after what's for breakfast, what's for lunch, and then every so often we rouse ourselves to complain about something that happened a long time ago. Because there are many levels of consciousness that we can tune into. And this is all of spiritual practice. No matter what path it is, if it's a true teaching, it's about one thing. It's about getting our attention focused on the upward, expansive movement of energy and keeping it there. That's what the practice of Kriya is. That's what prayer is. That's what chanting is. That's what right action is. And it's all designed in one way. It's designed to help us define ourselves bigger and bigger and bigger until we are able to define ourselves from actual experience as we really are. And all the saints and masters are the ones who tell us that. They say to us, you think that you are limited and small. Even Jesus, toward the end of his life, they were praising him for all that he could do. And he turned to his disciples. He said, that which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. Be ye therefore perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. He wasn't just being nice. They said something nice to him, so he said something nice to them. He was telling them who they are because he could see it. Now that is the purpose of Scripture. That is the purpose of the saints being born in this world, of the great masters being in this world. They show us our own potential, and then they give us hundreds of instructions so that we'll take some little tiny part of it just to start moving our consciousness ever toward that. And believe me, it's not easy. You all know that it's not easy. We make these resolutions of how we're going to do things, and something interrupts it, doesn't it? I love to blame the devil. The devil made me do it is one of my favorite expressions, because it is true. And I'm not saying that there's, some fiendish thing over here, although sometimes that force manifests as a fiendish thing that just comes in and makes you do the wrong thing. But it feels like that, doesn't it? The way Swami describes it perfectly is there is it was in what Dambara read today. This force. Now my mind goes blank. I think you're the one who read it anyway. On one side of us, the subconscious comfort of being as we've always been. There's the subconscious comfort of being as we've always been, even though, if we're honest, this is no really great shakes of an experience, is it? We're not so perfectly happy as we are, but we're so comfortable in it. I'm always amazed by how much we suffer and how reluctant we are to change. We're lonely, we're isolated, we're scared, and then somebody says, well, gee, why don't you move into a spiritual community, for example? Why don't you learn to meditate? Why don't you consider becoming a disciple? The known misery, at least I know how horrible this can be. That could be, who knows, even worse. There's this comfort and this imaginary love for what we already know. And on the other side is this higher awareness that may have been suppressed by our fears, but still recognizes that there is a light that belongs to us. And we get beat to pieces in the middle. Isn't that right? That we're not really that fear, and we're not yet that freedom. We're just standing in the middle being pulled both ways. Now, it's one thing to be pious and good because you've been so protected that you've never had any opportunity to sin. A very, very, a child raised in a hothouse of protection and never given a chance to do anything out of line is not necessarily a strong or a good child. And often such a person, as soon as they get to college, some of us remember our college years, and some of them are more extreme. We have this idea, now I'm going to try all these things out and find out what's really true. It's not strength to be narrow in our behavior because we have neither the energy, imagination, or courage, as Swami puts it, to sin. That's not really being good. What is being good is when we actually can see things as they are, we can recognize the opportunities, the choices that are available to us, and from our own understanding continually move closer and closer to the light. That's what real freedom is. Otherwise, we're just a bomb waiting to go off. There's no point in trying to be nice. What we really want to be is inwardly free. We want to be able to choose at all times what of these levels of consciousness, which one of these we are going to mirror through. That's why spiritual people often have great energy, and therefore their faults are also enormous. Swami Kriyananda had first-hand experience of this woman disciple of Yogananda's. Her name was Tara Ma. She helped edit Autobiography of a Yogi. She was a great disciple of his. She also was she was Swami's nemesis in a certain sense, because she was the instrument of him being expelled from Self-Realization Fellowship, and she worked for years and years to encompass his destruction. She was just determined to destroy him. And yet Swami still writes about her with great affection. He said she was a magnificent person. She was a great devotee. She was forceful and powerful. So when she was wrong, she was really, really wrong. But at least she was engaged. Often I meet people, who've had very hard lives, who've made really terrific mistakes, But when you look at them and you meet them, you see that the power they've developed from having to actually choose is so much more their own than those who just sort of drift through. Now, this brings us back to the simple fact. There is a force pulling us. There's a force pulling us away from our everlasting happiness, and there's a force, fortunately, which is greater, which is pulling us toward that. The way Swami describes it is, the sun shines, and it can be obscured by fog. And depending how deep that fog is and how far we are away from the sun, and whether we're turned toward it or turned away from it, we can become convinced that there is no sun. But the fog has obscured it. It hasn't actually put out that light. And so in our own life experience, we have one responsibility, and that responsibility is to face the light, and no matter how dense the fog, to keep moving toward it. It's not always easy, and that's why the devil made me do it helps. Because we realize sometimes we just get confused. This same woman that I was speaking of, who Taramata, who was so powerful, at one point Master told her not to do something, and she totally disregarded him. Master, I mean Paramahansa Yogananda. She totally disregarded him, went off for a few years and followed a trail that he had told her not to follow. It did not work out for her. When she realized her mistake, she just turned around and came back. Some of the more prissy nuns said to her, "How dare you come back after the way you disregarded him?" And she, having no regard for other people's opinions, which was her strength and her weakness, she said, "What do you want me to do? Worship my mistakes for the rest of my life?" Isn't that a marvelous way to put it? You know, so what? If we have really dynamic energy, our mistakes will also be colossal. But then also can be our determination to turn back. Every single day, we just need to start all over again. You know, the marvelous thing about reincarnation is there's no arbitrary ending point here. That's the good news, that's the bad news. You know, the bad news part of that is you're never, ever going to get away with it. Sooner or later, you're going to have to face it. You know, that's the, well, as I say, that's the good or the bad news. I don't know which side that is. But the point of that is, we have all the time in the world. We have eternity, literally, to finally get this straightened out. It's really entirely a personal choice. How much fear do I want to live with? How much do I want to suffer? How much do I want to cling and imagine that what I already know is the best there is? How courageous and dynamic do I want to be in exploring this new possibility which has somehow penetrated the fog and shown me where the light is shining? And yes, all along the way, marvelously clever things happen to us. You know, it's just a fact on the spiritual path that at a certain point, as soon as you begin to get involved in something spiritual that appeals to you, somebody will tell you how terrible that decision is. And they won't just do it in such a way that it's transparent. They'll find whatever it is that you're afraid of. You know, they aren't really what they seem. How do you know what really goes on? Maybe they're just taking your money and using it for their own comfort. Maybe this teaching will really make you crazy, whatever it might be. Because that force responds, we draw to ourselves whatever we have been. You know, whatever little comfortable world we've made up for ourselves, we keep trying to reinforce it. And there's lots of vibrations out there that'll keep reinforcing it because everything is possible. That's why over and over again, especially in our particular path, we give so much emphasis to attuning ourselves with those souls who are free. On our altar, we have the pictures of this line of gurus. It's not that these are the only gurus in the world. It's not that no other master has ever existed, but this is the channel through which this spiritual family finds freedom. But we focus specifically on the consciousness of one who is free, one who has broken the chains of this false reality and lives now in the clear light of divine understanding, is a window only for the vibrations of the infinite. Because one, we need to see that example in front of us. We need to know at all times that this is who I am and this is where I am going. And also, we need their help. Isn't that so? You need a companion within your heart to whom you can appeal. You know, Master, you have been through this. You have freed yourself. Help me. Jesus, you have been through this. Help me. That which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. This is the power of the divine spirit. And we, by lowering everything to this mediocre level of our egos together can do this, where is the divine example? Don't be afraid to embrace the possibility of perfect joy, of infinity, of perfect masters coming to this world to help us. Through that doorway, all that we seek will come to us.